Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Black-Eyed Kids horror stories. First story. I'm being stalked by a black-eyed child. I'm a believer in the supernatural. I'm also a big fan of true scary stories, narrations like Lazy Masquerade, B, Busta, and Let's Read. I have even considered starting one myself. I'm also an author with 5 novels published, one of which is a paranormal mystery. I'm not trying to self-advertise. I'm just disclosing this because I don't want someone finding out, hey, this guy is an author, and thinking I'm making this up. I am, admittedly, exactly the kind of person who would make up a story like this, so you can decide for yourself to believe me or not. Despite my belief in the supernatural, I've never believed in black-eyed children, Bex, even though I've always been fascinated by them. It just didn't make any sense. It seemed simultaneously random and contrived. Nevertheless, I always thought of them as fascinating and hoped to someday use them in a story. I never imagined that I'd be telling a true story about one. Very few authors make enough money from selling books to support themselves or a family. So I have a day job as a social worker for a private company in central Missouri, close to Sedalia. At the time, I worked in and around a small, rural community called Windsor in Henry County. My job took me to all over eastern Henry County, often in rural areas down dirt roads through thick forests. I don't recall the exact day or even month, but sometime in the spring of 2018, I was driving on a rural road south of Windsor. Specifically, I was driving south on Evans Road. Note, in Windsor, this is County Line Road because it is the county line between Henry and Pettis counties. Just south of the eastward turn to Brandon Road. Evans Road makes an L shape. You can see this in Google Maps of the area. That turns the road from north-south to east-west. When heading south, to your left is an open field, so you can see if there is anything around the bend on the east-west turn. Seeing there wasn't, I took the turn then glanced at something on my phone, probably changing a song, when I looked up and saw a boy in the middle of the road. I wasn't going very fast. You don't take a turn on a dirt road fast unless you want to land in a ditch. But if I hadn't turned fast, I would have hit him. He remained stationary in the road, and I sailed past him as I laid on the brakes and skidded to a stop. I saw him out of the side of my eyes as I passed him very close. Despite this, he didn't seem in any way troubled by almost getting hit by my SUV. It was only when I passed very close that I got a glimpse of his eyes, black. At the time, I thought nothing of it and assumed it was a trick of the light or part of the stress. Or maybe he was wearing sunglasses. Whatever the case, I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was just worried I might have hit a child. Once my vehicle was stopped, I opened the door and jumped out to see nothing there. No one, no boy, and no sign of a boy. Yes, I could feel him. I felt like I was being watched and got the sense that he was on the other side of my vehicle. I started to walk around it, thinking he was hiding from me because he was scared, understandably. I called out to him, then dropped to me knees to look under my SUV to see if I could find his feet and know how far from me he was on the other side of the vehicle. I saw nothing. I backed away from the parked SUV, far enough that I would see if anything emerged on either side, and waited. Nothing. Yet, the whole time I had a feeling of being watched. It's hard to explain, but it felt like the dread you get when your teacher scolds you for doing something, then watches you for a while after. Like, if you make another mistake, you're going to get scolded again. After a while, waiting around just felt stupid, so I got in my vehicle and left, still in a daze from what just happened. I messaged my wife and a couple of friends about it, but there was nothing else to do. I spoke to some locals about local ghost legends, but there was nothing about a boy haunting that road. There's an old cemetery not far from there, and Windsor is a very old community, so there's a high likelihood of some hauntings, but nothing about that road being haunted by a boy ghost. The feeling of being watched persisted no matter where I went for the next few hours, but was most intense when I was in my vehicle. It's worth noting that when I got out of my SUV, I left my door open, and when I was circling the vehicle, at one point the door was on the other side, so he could have jumped in there before I looked under it for his feet. It didn't occur to me at the time to search the inside of the vehicle. In a way, I'm glad I didn't. I left it alone after that, and it only ever came up again when friends wanted me to relay the creepy story to others. Coincidentally, my voice tutor is a member of a local ghost hunting group, and I talked with him about it. He asked if the boy frightened me. I said yes, but not because I thought he wanted to hurt me. More like the same kind of dread you get being stared at by a stranger. You just don't know what they want. It might be harmless, but it might not. A few months passed, and nothing. Over the summer, I started walking at night to exercise. I often did this at night, as my day job keeps me at work long hours, and evening are the only times I have. So, I'm usually walking around 8 or 9. I mentioned before I like to listen to horror narrations and documentaries about paranormal and unsolved mysteries. I usually load these up on my iPhone and listen as I walk. I live in a small town called Cole Camp, just south of Sedalia, Missouri. It, too, is a very old town with a fair share of ghost stories. It was even the site of a Civil War battle. I noticed sometimes while walking, I'd get that feeling again, like I was being watched. I would look around, expecting to see someone looking at me, but there would be nothing. Cole Camp is a small town, and it's rare to cross paths with someone else that time of night. However, from time to time, I would catch a glimpse of the outline of a boy, often in the shadows of someone's yard or an alley, only to have it vanish when I look back a second time. This has happened at least a dozen times, and it happened again as recently as last week. Which brings me to my latest encounter, which is by far the strangest after the initial. While walking, I started listening to a YouTube video about Becks. This was a compilation of spooky stories about them. While listening, my iPhone started acting funny. It would randomly skip to the next video, forcing me to jump back and find my place in the first one. My iPhone never does this. Cole Camp is literally in the middle of nowhere, so 4G is spotty at best. However, when it gives out, it usually just buffers or freezes. I've never had it just skip an entire video. I eventually assumed there was something wrong with that video and went to another one. It wasn't what I wanted anyway. I wanted theories about Becks. I'd already started suspecting that was what I was dealing with, and I needed some real data. I found a roundtable discussion video about them and started listening to that as I walked. It continually did the same thing, jumping around like the first video. That was when I felt it again. Him. I felt I was being watched. I turned to look up the street, where I sensed he was standing, but saw nothing. I turned back around, and as my head passed over a row of houses, I caught a silhouette of him in an alley between two houses, near a tree. I didn't realize I'd seen him at first, but when I did, I looked back and he was gone. I promptly returned home, but I have to stipulate that I wasn't really scared. I just felt compelled to return home. I don't think he means me harm, and if he did, he'd had plenty of chances already. But I just felt I needed to be home. I played a random video as I walked home and experienced no more jumps. Once I was home, I locked the door and switched to YouTube on my TV. My wife was at a choir practice, so I was home alone with our 4 cats. Once inside, I didn't feel him anymore. I started the video again, and it was playing fine for a while, until it froze. As soon as that happened, I noticed my cat Arya pointing her nose at the front door, growling lowly. Arya is our most aggressive, territorial cat. Also the smallest, so it's kind of cute, and she's the most likely to confront an intruder. But she never hisses at a closed door, even where there is a neighborhood cat on the other side. If the big door is open and she can see out the screen door, she just stares down the other cats to let them know this is her place. She never growls unless another cat is inside or near her, like if we open the door, so there isn't a barrier. What I'm saying is that this was unusual behavior for her, but not out of character. If Arya sensed a threat on the porch that a door might not stop, she would have behaved in exactly this manner. Meanwhile, I had an overwhelming sense that I should not go to the door or look outside. Not dread, just knowing I shouldn't. The YouTube video would not play at all. I remembered my front door security camera, which feeds to an app on my phone, and activated it. All I saw was a black screen. I assumed my app was down and restarted it, but nothing. I called my wife and asked her to check hers. She did and said hers was black too. Then, while I was on the phone with her, she said, "Oh, it's back." I grabbed my phone and looked, and sure enough, I could see the porch. Arya ceased hissing and walked off to do other cat business. I no longer felt the need to avoid the door, and when I looked myself, I saw everything was clear. Aside from this, the only other strangeness has been that I cannot add videos about BKs to my watch later list on YouTube. I can put them there, and they're there if I look immediately, but if I wait any length of time, they are deleted. It's been almost a week, and I haven't been walking. I've actually been very sick this weekend, but I'm feeling better. So I haven't encountered him again. I no longer fear him, if I ever did. I don't think he wants to hurt me, as he could have already if he wished it. He's never knocked on my door or attempted contact, but I've never spoken to him, either. Every time I feel him, I'll try to say something. I don't get a feeling of maliciousness from him, only curiosity. My wife, incidentally, calls herself a cautious believer in these things, but she does not believe in Beck specifically. She believes my initial encounter was a legitimate ghost sighting, but everything that has followed has been the product of my own overworked and highly creative mind, which is fair. I also know what this encounter is atypical of Beck's, in that they tend to be malicious and sadistic and are no shy about approaching people. Perhaps this one was touched that I got out of my vehicle to check on him after I almost hit him instead of driving away. There's no need to warn me of the risks. I already know not to let him into my home. If he comes to my door, I'll talk to him through it. Again, he's never tried this, though. I'm at a loss for understanding this. This is not my first paranormal experience, but it is by far the most intriguing. My previous paranormal experiences do not seem connected, but if anyone wants to hear them in order to find a commonality, I'll be happy to share those as well. Second story. I saw a boy with black eyes. 5 years ago, my sister gave birth to her second child, and because her partner was working shift work as a security guard, I often went over to her house on the nights. He worked to give her company and help with the kids. She lives about a 10-minute drive from me, so the routine was usually me going over there around 5 p.m., and leaving to come home around 12 to 1 a.m. On one of these nothing out of the ordinary nights, I left at the usual time and drove home singing to tunes in the car. I didn't feel tired, as I've always been a night owl, and I was just eager to get home and chill out after the stress or rocking a baby to sleep for over an hour. It happened every night with my nephew. The estate I live in has two main entrances that both lead you toward a big roundabout, which I have to turn it to go in the direction of my house. When I approached the roundabout, I could see a small light almost flickering on the street that continued directly ahead on the other side of the roundabout. So basically, straight ahead. I remember saying, "What the F asterisk is that?" And instead of turning left to go in the direction of my house, I made the quick decision to drive straight through and see what it was. The light was moving rapidly in a short space, and within seconds my car was close enough to see that the source of the light was a torch that a little boy was using to move back and forth in the patch of dirt that he was kneeling on. He looked around 4 years old. He had neat blonde hair and seemed to just be playing in the dirt, alone, at 1 a.m. in the morning. I slowed down the car and stopped in front of him. My window was already down, and he was on the same side of the street that the driver's side of my car was on, so we were feet apart. Once I had stopped, the car was still running, but I had my foot on the brake. I was about to ask him what he was doing outside by himself when his head shot up really quickly, and he stared directly at me. His eyes were entirely black, no other color in them, and I saw them very, very clearly. I think it took me about 3 seconds to register what I had seen and kick into flight mode, and I sped off. I did tell my friends and family about the experience, but for some reason it was never something that lingered in my mind. It was almost as though I woke up the next day and just put what I had seen in the back of my mind. With some hindsight now, I think that putting it away in the back of my mind was my way of dealing with witnessing something like that. Almost as though my brain couldn't handle it, if that makes any sense. Third story. I saw a boy with black eyes. 5 years ago, my sister gave birth to her second child, and because her partner was working shift work as a security guard, I often went over to her house on the nights. He worked to give her company and help with the kids. She lives about a 10-minute drive from me, so the routine was usually me going over there around 5 p.m. and leaving to come home around 12 to 1 a.m. On one of these nothing out of the ordinary nights, I left at the usual time and drove home singing to tunes in the car. I didn't feel tired as I've always been a night owl, and I was just eager to get home and chill out after the stress or rocking a baby to sleep for over an hour. It happened every night with my nephew. The estate I live in has two main entrances that both lead you toward a big roundabout, which I have to turn it to go in the direction of my house. When I approached the roundabout, I could see a small light almost flickering on the street that continued directly ahead on the other side of the roundabout. So basically, straight ahead. I remember saying, "What the F asterisk is that?" And instead of turning left to go in the direction of my house, I made the quick decision to drive straight through and see what it was. The light was moving rapidly in a short space, and within seconds my car was close enough to see that the source of the light was a torch that a little boy was using to move back and forth in the patch of dirt that he was kneeling on. He looked around 4 years old. He had neat blonde hair and seemed to just be playing in the dirt alone at 1 a.m. in the morning. I slowed down the car and stopped in front of him. My window was already down, and he was on the same side of the street that the driver's side of my car was on, so we were feet apart. Once I had stopped, the car was still running, but I had my foot on the brake. I was about to ask him what he was doing outside by himself when his head shot up really quickly, and he stared directly at me. His eyes were entirely black, no other color in them, and I saw them very, very clearly. I think it took me about 3 seconds to register what I had seen and kick into flight mode, and I sped off. I did tell my friends and family about the experience, but for some reason, it was never something that lingered in my mind. It was almost as though I woke up the next day and just put what I had seen in the back of my mind. With some hindsight now, I think that putting it away in the back of my mind was my way of dealing with witnessing something like that. Almost as though my brain couldn't handle it, if that makes any sense. Fourth story, black-eyed children. So, I totally forgot about this happening until my mom brought it up at dinner tonight, and now it's 9:30 at night, and I'm scared all over again. This was back in high school, either my freshman or sophomore year. I missed the bus, and I didn't have a car at the time, so my mom had to drive me to school. The road my tiny neighborhood, more like a glorified cul-de-sac, or however you spell it, was a long rural stretch that only had one equally tiny other neighborhood and a few houses here and there. It was 6 a.m. or something and still dark outside, and it was colder than a witch's tit. As we're pulling out of our neighborhood, my mom and I both saw these 3 children in blue and white private school uniforms standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder at the entrance of the neighborhood on the sidewalk. It was either 2 girls and 1 boy, or 2 boys and 1 girl. I don't remember the ratio, but the girl/S wore a blue and white skirt/dress outfit, and the boy wore a blue short-sleeved shirt with khaki shorts. This was weird for a few reasons. 1, it was 40 degrees outside. They looked like they were dressed for the summer, and they didn't even wear coats or anything. Secondly, there were 2 schools in the area, but not a private school till the next town over, and blue and white weren't the school's uniform colors. Third, what young kids just stand there in a single file line, not doing anything but standing? No joshing around, no nothing? Yeah, right. Lastly, this wasn't where the bus stop was. It was a few blocks down. Just a sprinkle of extra creepy on top for shits and giggles. There wasn't any streetlights. They were just standing in the dark. Not doing jack, except being creepy as hell, I guess. They were on the corner on the right, closest to the passenger's side, where I was obviously sitting. And, of course, we were turning right. As we got closer, I thought at first they didn't have faces, but it was just too shadowy and dark out, and the headlights only shone under their shoulders, which is how I can remember the outfit so vividly. Then we got closer, and I was relieved to see they had faces, but then got completely freaked all over again when I saw their eyes were all black. Like supernatural Sinandine fighting demons, all black. My mom saw it before I did, and she put the pedal to the metal and hightailed it out of there. I remember trying to look back and see them, but I couldn't since it was too dark. My mom didn't go back home till the sun rose, and it was bright enough to not be scared. Of course, nobody believed me at school, and my siblings thought we were full of it, but we know what we saw. We never saw them again after that, though. I thought they were ghosts, but a few months after that I heard about black-eyed children on YouTube or something and made the connection. We moved shortly after that, due to unrelated reasons. This was 3/4 years ago, and I had blissfully forgotten about it until my mom said, "Hey, remember when?" And now I want to die. I hope my irrational anxieties and fear around children that are small enough for me to punt across a soccer field is amusing at least. Fifth story. My strange encounter with an old woman with pitch black eyes. I was reminded of this the other day. Thought it was worth posting my experience here for opinions. Pretty sure there is some rational explanation for this encounter, but would be interested in any opinions, similar encounters, and theories. It's going to be long, so to be a bit backward, I'll kick off with the TLDR. It's a variant on what I've recently discovered is called the black-eyed kids phenomena. Bit of scene setting. In 96/97, I lived in a fairly old terraced house with a cemetery at the end of the road. Cliché, I know, but it's an important detail. Nothing remarkable about the house or the area. It was just convenient for college. Anyway, I was up late one night on the PC in my bedroom, which looked out onto the street. It was about 2 or 3 a.m. For whatever reason, probably to give my eyes a rest, I wandered over to the window and looked down the road in the direction of the cemetery, although it was too far down the street for me to see, and I saw 3 people walking slowly down the road. I could see that they were quite old and appeared to be dressed in funeral clothes, which given the hour was weird. There were 2 women and a man. I'd put their ages at about 80, and the woman in the middle was being steadied/guided by the other woman and the man, and as they came closer, I got the impression that she was upset. My first thought was that, given their age, she had recently buried her husband and grief had caused her to behave slightly irrationally, causing her to try to be out near the cemetery at that hour, and that the other 2 were friends/relatives trying to look after her and get her home. Anyway, it was all interesting enough for me to carry on watching as they got closer to the house. Just outside the front of the house was a street lamp. I watched them as they made their way past, but when they got to the lamppost, they all stopped, and the upset woman in the middle looked up at me and grinned. This was when things got weird. The grin became a sort of grimace, and if there was any color in her face to start with, it was now dead white. At that point, I realized I was staring right into her eyes, but her eyes were pitch black. Time sort of dilated. If you've ever crashed a car, the final split second before you make impact seems to drag out as you process more information than normal in the time frame. It was that sort of thing. I'm sure we only made eye contact for a second, but it felt like several minutes as my peripheral vision faded, and I felt like all I could see was these 2 black holes in her face drawing me in. Although the distance between us didn't change, she somehow felt like she was coming closer, and I was kind of aware, although I couldn't honestly say I could see them at that point, that the 2 people with her were just continuing to look down the road as if frozen, but waiting for this woman to finish whatever she was doing. I was suddenly hit with this intense feeling of dread and panic, so I threw myself on the floor. As soon as I'd broken her gaze, I felt pretty stupid that this upset old woman who clearly needed help had spooked me so badly, so I looked out the window again, and there was no sign of them. It was a longish straight road, and the house was towards the middle, so Linford Christie would have had trouble getting out of sight in the time I looked away, let alone 3 octogenarians. So Reddit, any ideas what this was all about? Tire mind playing tricks? It felt far too real for that, and all these years later, I can still remember every detail incredibly clearly, and I can recall a good amount of the dread I felt staring into those eyes. I get chills just retelling the story. 6th story. An urban legend follows me wherever I go. My name is Ryoko. I grew up in a rural village in Japan, and I later moved out and traveled to Sweden when I was 18 for university bursary. The village was located around the north side of Tottori. I lived with sister-mom. I had a few friends around the neighborhood. We loved exploring around the village since it was mostly just plain farmland, but it was beautiful. There was a shrine built at both ends of the village. On the far left side of the village, I live around 2 houses away from the shrine. Next to the shrine, there was a small shack, and inside was a place for offerings alongside materials used for rituals. We would do our rituals very different than the rest of Japan. Typically, you did 2 bows, 2 claps, and a bow. In our village, we would gather a white cloth or towel, dirt that has been blessed by Shinto, a silver scissor, and lastly water that has also been blessed by Shinto. We would hang the white cloth or towel on 2 wooden bamboo poles. Place a bowl of blessed dirt on a stone slab in front of the towel and pour half of the blessed water into the dirt. Then gently place both hands into the bowl, covering your hands lightly in the mud. We would then wash our hands with the remaining water over the cloth, essentially dirtying the cloth, while symbolically washing away the evil and transferring it onto the cloth. We would then snip the cloth with the silver scissor, destroying the evil. We would then stand up, bow 4 times, followed by 2 claps and a very deep bow. We would do these rituals every month in order to ward off the evil spirits in our village. There was an urban legend of a woman. Her name was Hanura Ikamori. She was in her mid-20s. She lived exactly in the middle of the village. It was around the time of the month where people would start to complete rituals, but that year, Hanura did not complete her ritual. In fact, she did not do it at all. At the last hour of the month, it was rumored that the people heard loud shrieks at the core of the village. The next morning, people found Hanura's eyes ripped out of her pale corpse. Hanura had a white blindfold wrapped around where her eyes should have been. The blindfold was made out of the clean, white cloth usually used during rituals. Her bedroom was covered in blood. It was said that hours later, her body was not found anywhere. Ever since there has been an urban legend of Hanura. It's said that if you do not complete your ritual before the end of the ritual month, you will find a woman in a white dress, wriggling around, almost dancing with a blindfold on in the middle of a distant field. It's said that if she stops dancing and looks at you, you have 1 more night to live before she steals your eyes and wears them as her own. But if she takes her blindfold off, you will be curses for the rest of your life and be doomed to have the most torturous life possible until you complete the ritual. But Hanura would make it very difficult for that to happen. I thought that the urban legend was created so that people would complete their rituals. When I turned 13, I decided that I would see if this was true. I was very confident that it was all a hoax. The last night of the month, I didn't do the ritual. At exactly midnight, I felt a presence watching over me. I decided to leave my lamp on that night, but it didn't help. Eventually, I managed to sleep. That night, I had a very vivid dream. It almost felt real. I was in front of the shack used for offerings. It was covered in sealed chains that I had to reach into a pot to grab the keys and break the seal. I entered the shack and closed the door behind me. I bowed down to the shrine, and after that, the door started to rattle, and the door handle would repeatedly be pushed down until it suddenly stopped. Blood leaked through the bottom of the door before I turned around. There was a pair of eyes aiding on the table on the shrine. The shack started to shake before the door burst open, revealing a tall woman in a white dress, before I woke up in a cold sweat. It was early afternoon when I woke up. That afternoon, I met my friends outside. We went out of the village to go exploring again. After about an hour, I noticed a woman standing in the middle of a field near a mountain. She appeared to be wriggling around. I grabbed my friend's binoculars and looked at the woman dancing around. Her arms were flailing like a flag, waving with the wind. She twisted and turned, but not like a human. Her torso twisted right around until she stopped dancing. She was looking right at me. I asked my friends if they saw her too, and they couldn't see anything. She pointed at me as her other hand removed her blindfold to reveal an empty eye socket with blood leaking from them. I told my friends to run as I ran back the village. I told my parents what happened. They immediately sent me to my room and covered the windows and walls with blessed papers. They commanded me not to open my room to anybody. Later that night, somebody knocked at my door, followed by vigorous attempts at opening my door. I fell asleep again shortly after that. The next morning, I was told to complete the ritual, which I did. During the ritual, I spontaneously forgot to complete the ritual with a deep bow. From then on, I will be haunted by Hanura every night for years. I was told to leave Japan several years later for a bursary. I felt relieved that I may be cured of the horrid nightmares I had each night. I moved to Sweden. 4 months' life seemed to be okay until about 3 months later. I woke up at 3 in the morning. I looked outside my window and found Hanura dancing. I immediately looked away at her, praying to myself. I could feel her. I went to sleep after that, having a dream. She was standing in my bed, staring at me with her blindfold off, but I couldn't move. That week I went to a Shinto. They commanded me to return to my village and complete the ritual. And once I did that, I'd have to live to the village's Shinto for 3 weeks before I can return to Sweden. So I did just that. I returned to Japan, and I completed the ritual. I was surrounded by a bowl of Shinto blessed salt, and Kay completed the ritual. It was not easy, though. I heard whispering while I in the process of the ritual, followed by tapping, pushing, and the feeling of a presence surrounding me. After that, I loved with the Shinto for 3 weeks before I returned to Sweden. I visited the Shinto in Sweden, and he advised me to bless my house and surround every room and the house in salt for 78 days, which I did. After that, life seemed to have went back to normal. I've been having normal dreams. I've been energized and happy for the last year, until yesterday. I had a dream I was back at the shrine. It was daytime at that time, though. I saw myself as a 13-year-old completing the ritual, unlike when I was actually 13. I saw Hanura standing in front of the shrine. Haldi G, the scissor used to cut the cloth. When I was about to cut the cloth, she held the scissor under her blindfold. When I snipped the cloth, she snipped the blindfold. When the blindfold fell from her face, she had beautiful, light brown hazel eyes, glimmering in the sunlight. She vanished, and I woke up. I felt calm when I woke up. I don't know if by chance that means she will take my eyes, or she found hers, but I need somebody to tell me whether that's bad or good. 7th story. Disturbing black-eyed girl experience. I am an atheist, and I have always been skeptical of the paranormal. Aside from being the most disturbing thing I have experienced, this encounter has turned my model of reality upside down. I was on the bus with my friend Veronica at around midnight. One of us mentioned that I was headed to Waterfront. She made a joke about how we shouldn't talk about where I was going on the bus because I would get stalked. I laughed and joked about that a little too, but I felt slightly uneasy. This is where I believe the experience began. I remember there was barely anyone on the bus. I saw 4 men chatting in front of us. Not that it's important, but for accuracy's sake, 2 men were talking to each other, and a short distance away another 2 men were chatting. At the time that I am writing this, a few hours after it happened, I don't remember seeing anyone else in the bus. I got off the bus, and Veronica walked me to the SkyTrain station. I remember paying for my ticket and calling her as soon as I paid to jokingly complain about the fact that they had raised transit fare by 5 cents. We chatted for a bit. I went down the stairs to the platform for the SkyTrain to Waterfront, and a girl was sitting about 15 feet away from me. I immediately recognized her from the bus, though thinking back, I can't recall actually seeing her on the bus. I don't know how she got from the bus stop to the SkyTrain station without me seeing her on the way, but I didn't think to question that at this point in the story. From what I can remember, she looked about 9 to 15. Keep in mind it was past midnight and she was alone. She was small and slim, and her hair was cut into a perfect gray bob. It looked more like a shiny, hard gray helmet than hair. If it wasn't a helmet, it must have been a wig. I don't remember anything about her facial features or clothing despite the fact that I only saw her a couple hours ago and, at one point in the story, stared at her intently for 15 minutes. I do remember she had an alternative sense of style, and I think she was wearing either a leather or denim jacket. I stayed 15 feet away from the bench she was sitting on. Something about her was disconcerting and made me mildly uncomfortable. When the SkyTrain came, instead of walking through the doors of the SkyTrain compartment straight in front of her, she walked the 15 feet to get into the same compartment as me. I I remember feeling a little weird about it. I didn't look at her while I was on the SkyTrain at all. This is where it gets weird. After the SkyTrain pulled into Waterfront Station, I got off it to get onto the C bus. When the SkyTrain arrived, the C bus was leaving in 20 seconds, so I ran to catch it. Only one other person was running to catch it with me. When I sat down, the girl with gray hair was sitting a few rows across from me, staring straight at me. I immediately recognized her. I don't know how she got to the C bus from the SkyTrain station within 20 seconds before me, without me seeing her. As soon as I saw her, I went from relieved that I made it onto the C bus to being on the verge of tears. This is the part that makes me cry when think about it. Her eyes were completely black. Her facial expression was inhumanly blank like a robot, and she was staring straight at me. I'm not exaggerating when I say it wasn't human. It was so wrong and unnatural. I have never seen or experienced anything like that in my life. All of a sudden, its face stretched into the most horrifying, evil smile. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. I cry every time I think about it. I was holding back tears at this point. How to get from the SkyTrain to the C bus without me seeing it? The C bus takes 15 minutes to get to the other side of the water, so I watched it for 15 minutes. I could not have hallucinated it being there for 15 minutes straight. It was physically impossible for it to get from the same SkyTrain as me to the C bus without me noticing it at all. I may have hallucinated the eyes and the smile, but I don't think it's possible that I hallucinated them for 15 minutes straight. But I could not have imagined her sitting there on the C bus for 15 minutes. When the C bus pulled in, I waited to get off at last and didn't see her on my walk home, though I was beyond terrified for the entire walk. The more I try to remember its physical appearance, the more hazy it gets. All I really remember is the helmet-like gray hair, pale skin, black eyes, and the blank stare morphing into the most disturbing smile I've ever seen. I remember it was dressed in alternative clothes similar to mine, and what's creepier is that my hair is gray too, almost like it was mimicking my appearance. It totally lacked the thing that makes humans human. It even lacked the thing that makes animals seem alive. It was unnatural. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. This is really scary to me, because if this was real, what else is real? And why was it following me? What did it want? Edit. This experience has greatly worsened my insomnia. I'm terrified that it will kill me in my sleep. If anyone reading this has experienced anything paranormal, an encouraging comment will be greatly appreciated, as this incident has also worsened my anxiety. 8th story. Do you believe in black-eyed kids? When I was in high school, creepypasta was all the rage. Everyone in my circle of friends had their favorite. James enjoyed the many stories featuring Slender Man, while his twin brother Scott preferred Jeff the Killer. Gabe was all about the Russian sleep experiment, and I myself was a huge fan of Candle Cove. But even though we all loved creepypasta, none of us did so more than my best friend Carson, who was obsessed with any story featuring black-eyed kids. It actually started to affect his social life, as one by one our friends grew tired of discussing it with him, until I was the only one left still willing. Well, maybe willing is the wrong word. I was just as sick of hearing about it as everyone else, but I wasn't going to turn away from Carson. He was my oldest friend. It was during the first week of summer vacation that he dropped the bomb. He came into the ice cream store I was chilling at and pulled me outside. The look on his face was deadly serious as he spoke. Do you believe in black-eyed kids? We'd had that discussion before. Carson often insisted that since there were so many different stories about black-eyed kids out there, some of them must be real. I usually admitted it was possible more to humor him than anything else, and we'd go on to talk about something else. But this wasn't like the rest of those times. The intensity with which he stared at me was too serious. It frightened me. I tried chuckling to break the tension. What? No, man, it's fun to read about, but they're all just a bunch of stories. Don't believe anything on the internet. I saw one last night. I snuck out for a smoke, and I saw it standing outside the front door. It was just a kid. It looked at me, and I saw its eyes. They were black. Oh, wow. Well, I tried to think of something to say. Maybe you were having a nightmare? Yeah, maybe. I could tell he wasn't happy with my response, but he didn't push it. We ate some ice cream and rode our bikes around town. A week later, my dad called a family meeting. He was a deputy in the local sheriff's department, and he often gathered us to talk safety whenever there was a nearby burglary or something. That night, we were all gathered in the living room, and Dad said, "Kids, we're going to be keeping your bedroom windows locked until further notice. That means no sleeping with them open, understand?" But Dad, my little sister's whines were like X-Lax for the ears. "It gets too hot. Your mother and I will buy new fans for your rooms," Dad said. "I don't want any windows in the house to be accessible. We've been getting a lot of reports of prowlers hanging around people's homes. Way more than usual. So we're taking precautions." I didn't connect Dad's warning about prowlers to the nightmare Carson had until a few days later. I rode my bike to the police station to drop off a bag lunch for Dad, and I overheard old Mrs. Nielsen, our local cat lady, complaining to a deputy. And I just know this has something to do with my missing babies. 6 of them haven't come home. It's these devil worshippers. Satan is corrupting the hearts of our children and sending them to murder our babies. Officer Jim, the new guy on the force, was taking her statement and seemed to be struggling to keep his face neutral. "Did you actually see the prowler take one of your cats, ma'am?" "No, but what else could it be?" She snapped. "I saw the hooligan's eyes when he was staring in my window. They were all black. Black to show the evil in his heart. Devil worshippers are taking my babies." I didn't listen to the rest of their conversation. Things were starting to piece together in my head, like a twisted jigsaw puzzle. I dismissed Carson's experience as a nightmare caused by an overactive imagination that focused too much on black-eyed kids. But now Mrs. Nielsen was saying she saw them too. And I somehow doubted she was in a reading creepypasta. Could my town's prowler problem really be due to black-eyed kids? A part of me wanted to believe. I was still at an age where the ambiguous nature of urban legends appealed to me. I wanted there to still be magic in the world, even if it was a dark kind of magic. It was a little scary, but no one in the stories was ever hurt or killed by black-eyed kids, so I stayed up all night staring at my window, waiting for the opportunity to see a black-eyed kid for myself. When midnight came with no sight of them, I started sneaking around the house to check the other doors and windows. Several nights in a row, I did this without catching so much as a glimpse. Carson wasn't as excited as I thought he'd be when I told him about the supporting evidence for black-eyed kids existing. He mostly remained silent while I gushed theories. I was not a smart kid. I wasn't grasping the gravity of the situation, even after a temporary curfew went into effect. It didn't dawn on me until one day I was at the pool. On my way into the locker rooms, I heard crying. Upon investigating, I found my classmate Suzanne curled up in the showers, weeping. My first instinct was to make fun of her for being the boys' locker room. I was a kid. Judge me mercifully, but something in my lizard brain identified her tears as fearful, not sorrowful. "What's wrong?" I asked. She told me of the person who visited her window every night. He wore a gray hoodie, and she couldn't see his face well in the dark, but she could tell his eyes were dark pits, empty of color. She said he kept leaving things on the ground outside her window, things like severed cat heads and dog paws. I took a shortcut through the woods on my way home from the pool, Suzanne's words still fresh in my mind. I thought about Mrs. Nielsen's missing cats and the animal parts left outside Suzanne's window. In the stories, no one ever got hurt by black-eyed kids. They would knock on people's doors asking to be let in, but no one ever invited them. But all of the stories said people felt like the black-eyed kids were dangerous. Now, that it was seeming like there was something more to this than urban legends, I couldn't help wondering about why there were no accounts of what happened if you invited a black-eyed kid into your home. A twig snapped behind me. I froze in my tracks and listened for more. When nothing reached my ears, I turned to look for the source of the sound. There was nothing around me but empty forest. I resumed walking, and this time I paid attention to my surroundings. After 5 minutes, I heard a rustling in the brush, and I spun around just in time to see a glimpse of someone wearing a gray hoodie disappear into the trees behind me. I'm not ashamed to admit I ran. In the blink of an eye, I turned into an Olympic-level sprinter, and I took off down the trail like Usain Bolt. My terror was so overwhelming, I didn't even feel any pain or discomfort from my mad dash, despite the fact that I almost never moved faster than a light jog. Adrenaline is a hell of a thing, isn't it? I reached my house, locked every door behind me, and hid under my bed for hours. My parents didn't realize I was home when they returned later that day. I could hear them talking in the kitchen, and Dad was using his cop voice, so I crawled out from under the bed and crept to the kitchen door to listen. Just can't believe it. How awful. How did she die? Officially, she suffered a massive cardiac event. But my dad hesitated, something he never did in front of us kids. Damn it. If you'd seen it, you'd think there was something more going on too. Her front door was open and she was right behind it. The look on her face, if you ask me, she died of fear. Something was at her front door, and when she opened it, it scared her to death. The nightmare lasted another month, during which dozens more people reported incidents of prowlers in their yards at night, and there was a spike in missing pets. What my dad thought was weird was how there were no burglaries or robberies, which usually followed an increase in prowling incidents. Some of the kids at school started talking about seeing a black-eyed kid at their bedroom windows. Poor Suzanne got the worst of it. She saw it so much that her mother enrolled her in therapy, and eventually the whole family moved away. Last I heard, they were starting Suzanne on antipsychotics. I tried talking to Carson about everything that happened that summer, but he refused. If I persisted after he asked me to stop, he'd simply get up and leave the room. He never mentioned black-eyed kids again, not even after years had passed. I've told that story several times. I've told friends and strangers I met at the bar, and once I even got drunk and posted it on Facebook. But I never told anyone the whole thing, not even while drunk. I'm telling it now. I don't understand the reasons why, and I still think maybe I'm making a huge mistake, but I'm telling it anyway. A woman died. A girl developed bad mental problems. I think maybe they deserve for the whole story to be told. 3 years after that summer, I was helping Carson clean out his bedroom before we both went off to college. I don't know if he'd been sloppy or overconfident or if he simply didn't care, but I found his secret buried underneath 3 years of piled clothes and rubbish in his closet. A gray hoodie I'd never seen him wear, and in its pocket a pair of black scare contact lenses. 9th story. I'm being terrorized by small children. So I'm an author, and I've been struggling to find any sort of inspiration for a book. I went on writer's retreats, read tons of books, scrolled through endless Reddit threads for anything that would spark an idea, but no matter what I do, nothing seems interesting enough to write about. On top of this horrible writer's block, my grandmother passed away, leaving her old house back in Virginia to me. It's a miracle if you ask me. Getting the house, not her dying. I'm not heartless. I knew that the change of scenery was going to help, but boy was this going to be the worst possible idea I had. A few weeks after the funeral, we met up with some lawyers who arranged the paperwork and paid the fees for the house, and I could move in. My parents came up with me to help with the unpacking. There weren't many renovations to do for the house, just some peeling wallpapers and leaky pipes. We got new bedding, new curtains, cleared away all the cobwebs, and started to put in my things after putting my grandma's things in the attic. After a week of making the house livable, my parents left. If I'm being honest, I was glad they came up with me. The house always gave me the heebie-jeebies. Like I love my grandma, but the house was its own thing. But it felt good having my own house. The next thing on my list was finding a job, because the whole author thing was not bringing in any money. The incident happened on a random Saturday, a few months after moving in. I hadn't gone into work, so I could write. It was still early morning when I heard thunder in the distance, and by lunchtime a storm was hitting the town. I could hear the trees beating against the window, garbage bins rolled in the streets, and wind chimes hit each other with great force that I thought they would break. I was staring out the window looking at the street when the room lit up in a flash and the lights went out. Half-heartedly, I got up from the sofa and went down to the basement to switch on the circuit breaker back on. The rain hit the glass panes with such force, disguising the knocking on the front door for a second, but they could be heard during the pauses of the thunder. Slowly, I made my way towards the door, but by the time I arrived at the front door, the visitors were getting impatient. My heart broke as soon as I opened the door. In front of me stood two children who couldn't have been older than 9 years old, barely wearing any clothing that would keep them warm during this storm. It was the girl that spoke first, asking me to use my phone to call their mom to tell her that they would be home soon. I had so many questions. Why would these little children be out alone in a storm with no phone? What mother would allow her children to leave the house without proper clothing? Not once did they look at me throughout the whole encounter, but nevertheless, I moved aside to let them pass through. I made my way towards the living room with the children behind me. Once we arrived, I asked them for their mother's phone number and started to dial the number they gave me, but no one was answer. I asked the girl to tell me the number again in case I misunderstood her, but the number was the same as before, so I suggested that they wait out the storm here. Then once the storm is over, they can leave. There was no reply, but I took it as a yes. The children needed to clean clothes, fearing that they would catch a cold if they stayed in their wet clothing. I told them to follow me as I went upstairs toward the bathroom to get them some clean towels. After getting the largest towels I had available, I grabbed 2 sets of pajamas and showed the children my room and the guest bedroom, so they had some privacy as they changed. The children's eyes still never left the floor, not even to take the clothes from my hands. Whilst they changed, I went to the kitchen to prepare some hot chocolate and some biscuits I found in the cupboard. After a few minutes, they came down to the kitchen and sat on the table as I placed the steaming mugs in front of them. While the children were drinking, I went back to the living room to try their mother again. This time I got an answer. It was an older gentleman. I told him that he didn't need to worry about his children since they were safe in my kitchen drinking. I informed him that I wouldn't allow them to leave until the storm, but he seemed confused at the mention of children, telling me that his children haven't been 9 for ages and his grandchildren didn't even live in my area. I told him that I had a wrong number and apologized before ending the call. I walked back to the kitchen to ask the children to write the number down this time, so I don't keep dialing wrong numbers. I walked into an empty kitchen. The children know where to be seen. I called out for them and searched the lower level for any sign of them. I searched all the cupboards and closets thinking they were pranking me, but I couldn't find them. Whilst I was in the living room searching, I heard a loud crash coming from the kitchen. Annoyed, I walked towards the kitchen and was greeted with all the contents of my cupboards on the floor. At the same time, I could hear laughter and footsteps running up the stairs. I ran out of the kitchen and up the stairs, leaving the mess for me to clean up after I found the children. To give you a small layout of the second story of the house. The whole level is connected via a long corridor with rooms on either side of it. There was a bedroom, bathroom, and a storage room with the entrance to the attic. As I was walking past the storage room, I noticed that the door was open and noticed that even the attic hatch was open when I entered the room. I carefully climbed up the ladder and switched on the light bulb, even though it barely gave out any light. Apart from old clothes and books I got from my parents' house and old items my grandma would store, the attic was empty. The sound of thunder filled the silence of the house as the storm started to grow stronger than before. A flash of lightning lit up the room and revealed the shadows of the children climbing down the ladder. I followed them down the hatch and was guided towards the entrance of the house by their laughter. I found them waiting for me. They were looking up at me with a horrific grin on their face. A chill ran down my spine as I finally could look at their faces for the first time. Their eyes were black. I'm not talking about their iris being black or metaphorically looking black, but their whole eye was black. It was as if I was looking at an empty eye socket. By looking at their whole face, it looked like they completely transformed from those small, weak children to these horrifying creatures. Their skin looked almost translucent and was decorated with purple veins that reminded me of the lightning from outside, coming from their eyes. Their bodies looked tiny compared to their already large clothing. Their eyes never left my face, following my every move as I slowly backed away towards the kitchen, where I could make my escape through the back door. I never broke eye contact in fear of them disappearing, but once I arrived in the kitchen, they disappeared. That night, I couldn't sleep. Their eyes remained ingrained into my memory. They were there every time I closed my eyes or in the shadows near the storage room. And now I'm trying to figure out what those things were. I came across this thread, so maybe someone had a similar experience to me. Update. I came across some stories similar to mine, and to my understanding they're called black-eyed children and are creatures that shouldn't be messed with. Everyone was saying that you shouldn't do what they ask or let them into your house, cause it will lead you to be curse you and haunted by these children until you die. I'm not one that believes in curses or the spiritual things, but now as I write this update hiding in my wardrobe, I can't help but feel stupid for not believing what people were telling me and didn't try and get help. I don't know what to do. I can't call the police because it would believe me when I'll tell them that I'm cursed by some little children. 5 weeks have passed since the events of that day. I had slowly started to forget what had happened, and I was back to my normal routine, go to work, writing, and I even made friends with my neighbors and would occasionally go for dinner to their house. They're a sweet old couple who make a mean chicken pot pie. Anyways, one night, I heard a knock coming from upstairs whilst I was making dinner, dismissing it as just branches banging against the house from the wind. It is winter after all. I continued to make dinner. The knock continued, but I ignored it again. The more times I ignored the knock, the more persistent they kept becoming. Eventually, I started to realize that maybe the knocking was not the wind, so I tried to hunt down where the sound was coming from. As I went up the stairs, I started noticing that the knocks were forming a familiar tune. I followed the sound into my bedroom and entered the room, switched on the lights. "Did you miss us?" was written in a black substance on the mirror. The light bulb exploded, and I was left in a dark room. The door behind me slammed shut, and the knocking was replaced with the sound of children's laughter. I could feel the room spin as "Come Play With Us" was being chanted over and over. Their sound was bouncing off the walls from all directions. It made my ears ring, and I started to feel lightheaded. Something started to trickle down from my nose. The smell of metal filled my nose, making me feel nauseous. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the children looking over my body and telling me to play with them forever. I was alone when I woke up, but I could still hear the children laughing outside. So I locked up my room and pushed my chest of drawers in front of the door and went in the wardrobe where I'm hiding right now. The house suddenly feels very quiet and calm compared to earlier. All I can hear is my heartbeat thumping at my chest and the sound of blood rushing through my ears. There's the faint sound of something scratching the bedroom door, like some kind of animal is trying to come inside. But I'm safe here. I have the chest of drawers. They're very heavy. I could barely move them myself, so it's keeping anything from coming inside. I have nothing to worry about. I may be imagining things, but I can hear something moving the drawers aside. I want to look out of the wardrobe, but the thought of leaving the only place of refuge I have left in my house is terrifying. The door just opened. I need help. 10th story. I've encountered the black-eyed children. Old account, but long-time lurker of the sub. An old friend hit me up. I started reminiscing and remembered this. I believe I've encountered the black-eyed children over a decade ago in rural Appalachia. This has always low-key disturbed me. Keeping in touch to this day, we've never brought it up again. We were at a local/state park sort of place at between 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. I remember we were parked alongside the woods and some picnic tables. It was pretty desolate. We were technically trespassing 17F and 17M at the time, and what we were doing there you can leave to your imagination. As our curfews were approaching and we were finishing up our time together, we experienced a very ominous feeling. He was in the driver's seat preparing to start the car and pull off. The car doesn't start. We sort of laughed it off as it wasn't the first time and talked. Suddenly, to the right, passenger side where I was sitting, we see faint lights coming out of the woods. The ominous feeling intensified. Emerging from the woods, there are 4 to 5 children, younger than us, like appearing to be 7 to 11 years old. I'm not going to claim they had black eyes. It was dark, and I don't remember as I was pretty shook. I didn't read about the black-eyed children lore/phenomenon until years later, which described everything else that we experienced. All I could say is they were not normal. They didn't belong. The cabins at the park were not occupied. They weren't even getting rented out as it was autumn/winter. We were miles from the park's hotel. There were no adults. They were absolutely out of place. Or the lights. I don't know, but the closest thing I can compare them to are glow sticks, as if they had opened a package of those novelty glow sticks that include bracelets, necklaces, or wands. But it wasn't like they were having fun or goofing off. They just stopped, stood there, and stared at us. He tried asking what they were doing here, if they were lost, where their parents. No response. The oldest-looking M child, a bit heavy-set with a gray hoodie on, approached the vehicle just in the front where the passenger headlight/corner would be. My friend started really freaking out at this moment. He locked the doors and was like, "Hell no. We gotta go." Eventually the car starts. The children don't move, and the kid stays put in front of the car. My friend eventually yells to the kid, "I'm going to run you over." The boy slowly backs away, raises his arm, and points at us as we were leaving. I didn't look back. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.